Hello and welcome to episode 247 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And if you haven't checked out our back catalogue, please do that because we've got, 246 previous episodes. Actually, possibly more if you count drafting notes and stuff. But anyway, there will be some guests that you want to hear from because we've had some brilliant authors, screenwriters, and others on the podcast. But we are currently doing a little run of what we call industry episodes, where we're speaking to people on the other side of the fence from the writer, the agents, the editors, and people like that. So we've spoken to some great editors recently. Last week we spoke with Francesca Barbini of Luna Press Publishing, and this week we're speaking to another brilliant editor.
That's right. This week we're speaking with the wonderful Phoebe Morgan, who is actually someone who straddles both sides of that same coin. She's an author in her own right. She's had 5 books out. The latest is The Trip. And at the same time, she's also the current, very recently, in the last 4 weeks or so, the executive publisher for commercial fiction at Simon Schuster. And it's a really interesting chat. She talks very openly about the reality of the publishing industry, what the interaction is between different parts of a publishing house, the sales team, the marketing team, how bidding wars and preempts work, how the money goes, the advances are built, how they're put together. Very interesting. I think no matter where you are in your publishing journey, I think you'll find something here of value. So it's a really interesting, open, honest conversation about the publishing industry.
She's very frank and open with what she's saying, which is really interesting. Also a lot of fun to speak with as well. So we'll get straight into the episode in a moment. There will be an advert for our Writer's Notebook if you're listening to this podcast, not if you're watching on YouTube. But I just did want to mention that we do have a Patreon where you get early access to these episodes, you get some bonus episodes, and all sorts of other great benefits. You can check that out. If you join at the free level, you can join our Discord server.
That's right.
What's a Discord server, Tarek?
It is, think of it like a mini community, all chatting together on a forum with different rooms on topics.
Excellent. I just threw that out there.
That wasn't too bad. Okay, that's not too bad.
Yeah, no, but you can. We're trying to build up a sort of friendly little writing community there. There's published authors on there. We're on there. There's people just starting out and things like that. So yeah, and we talk about writing, we talk about other stuff. So yeah, if that sounds of interest, like I say, you can join through the Patreon for free if you want to do that as well.
But if you do want to give us a little bit of money, then you get wonderful perks. You get early access, you get free books, free notebooks.
You do. All of these sorts of things are available. It's all on the Patreon. So I'll put a link in the podcast description and you can check that out. But enough salesmanship from us. We'll get into the episode and we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
So my normal question when we have authors on the podcast, my normal starting question is, did you always want to be a writer? Now, you're in both camps, but was being a writer your primary ambition?
No, so I did always want to write. So I always was writing when I was younger. I was always making up stories, and I always loved English, and I always loved that creative side. But I didn't really think about being a published author until I was a bit older. When I was maybe a teenager or early 20s. And I, like you said, I still balance both. So I write on the side and I work full time in publishing. But to be honest, I don't have any desire to be a full time writer. So I very much enjoy having both strands. And if I had to choose one, I would have to choose the day job, because not just financially, but also because I really genuinely love being on the publisher side. Like, I love being part of a team. I really enjoy working with authors in that capacity, and I like being part of a big corporation. Like, I am quite a team player, and the idea of just writing on my own all day just fills me with dread. I think I would find it really lonely. And while I can manage to balance both, I still want to try. I know it can be difficult for some people, but to be honest, like, the kind of schedule I'm on, I don't find it too difficult. So for me, I kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. I mean, does having experience on both sides of the coin help that kind of, a lot of authors that we chat to, you mentioned it there, that kind of sitting by yourself in a room with all your, your thoughts kind of spiraling sometimes, and you're in the middle of a book and it's not working and you're getting stressed. But does working on the other side of that help? Could you bring things from your editorial side into your writing side?
I think it does help, mainly because you have such an overview of the industry, and especially in the job that I'm in now, which is at Simon Schuster, I oversee all of the commercial fiction list and the team.
Yep.
So by that point, you're pretty involved with the business side of things and the strategy. And so I know that for authors, like, writing is only one piece of the puzzle, and you cannot make a book work without a good team behind you. And so I suppose it helps in the way that I can be quite pragmatic in terms of what actually makes a book reach readers. There is also a certain alchemy that we can't predict. And obviously sometimes books really catch fire and the publishers are a bit on the back foot, and sometimes vice versa, where we put a lot behind a book and it doesn't actually work. So there is an alchemy to it, and the market moves in mysterious ways. But I think having all that background knowledge enables me to I don't really take the writing very personally, or, I don't feel I suffer in the same way as some writers who don't work in the industry, who, I don't suffer from a lack of knowledge around it. And I suppose that can make it feel a bit less romantic, I suppose. But I suppose
it's quite a good commercial view you've got of things, and that's a good attitude to have.
I mean, I tend to think knowledge is power, really. That kind of saying, knowledge is power. And actually that's why when you emailed me, you mentioned my Substack, and that's why I started the Substack, The Honest Editor, because I think I want to give writers, like, as much as I can. Like, obviously can't give them all the ins and outs of every single thing, but where I can share information, I think it's quite useful for writers to have, because it enables them to take a step back and realize that there's a lot more going on than just you writing a book and giving it to a publisher. There's a lot of work that goes on both sides, and there are sometimes things that are very much out of a writer's control. And so I think the industry has a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of unfairness towards authors, to be honest with you. And so I partly set up the Substack to try to help counter some of that, so that at least it could feel like we were all on the same side.
Nice.
And you said, obviously, given the choice, you would pick the day job over being a writer. But how did you first step into publishing and working as an editor and stuff?
So I actually trained as a journalist. I did an English degree at Leeds University, and then I thought I wanted to be a journalist. So I did the NCTJ, the journalism qualification in London after uni, and qualified, and then was a journalist for about a year. I was a really bad journalist, I think. I just wrote too much. Like, my articles were too long. And I think I was always using too sort of flowery language. And I remember my editor would be like, Phoebe, can you just stick to the facts? Like, I was kind of telling a story, with the articles. And I wasn't very good at it. I mean, what I was good at was meeting deadlines. I think it was helpful in that. And it also does teach you the skill of just being able to just go and talk to anyone, because you have to. But what I didn't love about it was that it just felt quite restrictive, and it just felt, I was working on a local newspaper, and there were lots of brilliant people there, and there is a place for local newspapers, but sadly, this is when I was starting out, so it's years ago now, but that industry is not flourishing, I would say. So I was quite worried about the longer term prospects of local news, and I just didn't love it. And it was hard. You see a lot of people in journalism, they work really hard. I was really long hours, really bad pay. And I looked at some of my colleagues and I thought, they really love this and I don't love it. And now then that's how I feel in publishing, because that was also long hours and at the beginning not great pay. But I loved it. And so that was the difference. So it didn't really matter to me because I just loved it so much. And it's probably one of the best decisions I ever made was to move from journalism into publishing, because I just felt like I had found my home and I haven't really looked back. Then I started applying for publishing assistant jobs while I was working in journalism, and got quite a lot of rejection because it's quite competitive. And then I finally got a job as a publishing assistant at Octopus Books, which is a non-fiction division of Hachette. And then I worked there for a few years, and then I moved to HarperCollins in fiction. And then since then, I've always done fiction, which was what I really wanted to do. But you sort of have to go through a sideways route sometimes to get into the industry, because it is quite competitive when you're starting out.
Okay. And now you currently are executive publisher for commercial fiction at Simon & Schuster. So I wonder if you could just start by saying what does that mean? What is that?
Yeah, what is that topic?
What do you do?
I mean, God knows, you tell me. I've only been there 4 weeks, so I'm still kind of working it out. No, it's yeah, I'm really excited to have stepped into the job. It's essentially running the commercial fiction team. So there's editors, 12 editors, and we all work across different genres. So crime and thriller, romance. We recently set up a new science fiction and fantasy imprint, which I'm really keen to grow. And I manage, people on the team, and then I look after the profit and loss report for the fiction division, and I oversee the list. So that means that I have a list of about 10 authors that are sort of my authors. At this stage, they are actually the editor that was before me. She acquired them, and I have taken those authors on. And then I oversee the list, so you sort of can have a say in any bit of the list, and you kind of look after it all and make sure that I'm looking at the covers, and I'm looking at the copy, and I'm looking at the systems and the way we're doing things. So just trying to drive growth on the fiction list is sort of what I was hired to do. And as I said, I've literally only been there a few weeks, so these past few weeks have been getting to know everybody and trying to understand how things work. I will acquire a little bit, I think, but I won't acquire very many new authors just because of the nature of the job. There isn't much space or time, but I obviously want to empower the more junior editors to buy brilliant books and help steer their careers as well.
And were you acquiring books in your previous role?
So I've been acquiring for quite a number of years now, and I've acquired some. I mean, all of my authors that I've ever worked with, I really have loved. And whenever you move roles, so before this role, I was at Hodder Stoughton at Hachette, and you have to leave the authors because their contract is essentially with the publisher, not with you. And so that's always the hardest part, when you have to call your authors and say, I'm sorry, I'm leaving for a different job. But the publishing industry is small and life is long, so often you get to reunite, maybe further down the line. And
what sort of factors play into you when you're deciding, all right, I like this book, I want to acquire this book, what sort of factors are you thinking about? Because it's more presumably than just the writing. Sometimes you have to think about the commerciality of it all and stuff.
So for commercial fiction, you definitely have to think about more than just the writing. It's a bit different in literary fiction, but I don't work in literary fiction, so I won't pretend to be an expert. But for commercial fiction, we very much think about how it's all going to come together. So the overall package, and I know package isn't a very romantic word when it comes to talking about books, but the reality is that we want to sell those books. We want to get them into readers' hands. So I have to think about how the cover will look, how the title will look, and where the book sits in the market. And so when I acquire a novel, I have to take it to an acquisitions meeting where sales, marketing, publicity come, and I have to pitch it to them and see if they can believe in the book as much as I do. And if they do, then the sales team will give me numbers, we'll run those numbers and come up with a level to offer for. So that part is quite mechanical, and you really have to have a vision as an editor for how you are going to bring this book to market. Like, why should you be the editor to do it? Why should you be the publishing house to do it? Why are we going to be better than the author just putting it on Amazon themselves? What are we going to offer the author? I get a lot of submissions every week, and I read a percentage of all of them. I can't read all of them, but if I'm enjoying something, I will just keep reading. And then that's kind of how you know if you want to take something forward, if you can't stop reading. But I think a lot about the concept and the hook, what we would call the hook in publishing. So what is like the one-line USP that we can use to sum the concept of the book up? And the hook is important because that's sort of what flows through the campaign in terms of the marketing and the sales. And it's really important for us getting the book into retailers, which obviously is how you actually sell more books, is getting it into the bricks and mortar shops and, optimizing it online. So I think about all of those things. And I have turned down some really great books. And, I think you mentioned in your email that you had Miranda on from Viper, and she published The Appeal by Janice Hallett, which is amazing. Such a good book, such a good publication. So I turned that book down. I remember I turned it down, and it wasn't because I didn't like it. I thought it was great, but I really couldn't think how to publish it. And it's just a really good example I use because she had such a vision for how she would publish it. She had a great cover. She really launched Janice's career. And, maybe I wouldn't have been able to do that. Like, if she had come to me, I might not have been able to do it. So, and there are other books equally where I have been able to do it because I've had that clarity of vision. And so that's why I always say to authors, you really only need one. Yes, like you don't need every publisher in London clamoring for your book. I mean, obviously that would be lovely, but you actually just need one editor to believe in you and have that vision. So the vision is kind of what I look for.
It's very interesting, and I guess it takes a degree of I can't think of the word, having to be able to step outside yourself and be honest about yourself and where your limitations are and what you can and can't do. And when you are making that decision, say you have read something and you think, I love this book and I can see what I would do with it, and you take it to your team and you're pitching it to sales, etc., and they're all saying what they would do, and you're trying to put a figure on the package. How does that work? How do you as a team decide how much a book is worth? Where does that come from? And is it purely based on return, or is it more than that? Is it like a gut feeling playing to it at all?
So it's a number of factors. So we run a profit and loss report. So basically we'll pitch it. The sales team then give us numbers for the home market, the export market, digital market, and we plug those into the P&L. And then we minus any marketing and publicity spend and any production spend and plant cost, which is usually pretty high because it's so expensive to make books these days. And then we try sort of different advanced levels, and it kind of like gives you a number at which the margin is acceptable to us as a business. So whether that's like 40% margin or whatever, and then not all 40%, sometimes they're lower. But then, I mean, that's kind of what you aim for. But then what happens is if you get in an auction, sometimes all of that logic can go out the window because you get really competitive and you're like, you want to win the book for reputation reasons or because you really, really love the book. Often it's because the editor like absolutely loves the book and wants to win it, and you get sort of pushed up by the other publishers. So I mean, that's how an agent will, that's how what a good agent does, is he or she gets the author more money by doing that, by playing as all off against each other. And some people don't do that. Some people will just drop out of an auction, and everyone will have their own level that they're comfortable with based on how much money has that publishing house making, how much risk can we afford to take. And I think sometimes there is an argument, there's a lot of discussion about celebrity fiction and publishing and big brands, but what actually is true is that sometimes those big hitters can allow us to take more risks on smaller books or like less established authors, because they bring in more money and then we've got that money to use on riskier propositions, if that makes sense. And so you have to love it as an editor. You have to feel a connection to it and feel that you can do the best job with it for the author's sake and for your sake and your team's sake. And after you've been in the industry a while, like I remember in one of my first jobs, my boss was like, well, how much do you want to offer for this book? And I remember like literally put the fear of God into me. So I was like, I don't know. Like, I had no idea. I was like, oh my God. And she was obviously kind of testing me to be like, what do you think? But I was like, oh my God, I don't know. But like, as you kind of grow up in the industry, you start to realize what the market value is of these novels, like what other people are paying. And different imprints have different rules. But then there are also other factors in a good deal for an author. It's not just the advance, like it's the royalties, it's the payment schedule, it's the translation rights. And so it's really important that authors are sensible and that I think that it's good to have a literary agent personally to help you assess the contract and assess the strength of the offer. And because it's not always just the highest bidder, there are other factors to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you're having this discussion, but with the rest of your team, but who is ultimately making that decision? Because man on the street, I guess, thinks that you get an agent, you get an editor, and then your book gets published. Essentially, that they think that's the chain. And obviously, there's much more discussion going on there. And are editors only one part of the jigsaw? Do they hold a stronger say in that discussion, or is sales just as big or even bigger?
Sales is pretty big, and so is marketing. I would say, I mean, in this role, I have more of a say, I suppose, because it's more senior. So I can, you have a sign off up to a level, like there's a level of financial, I could say, okay, yes, we're going to do this as a team. But above that level, it has to go to my boss, who's our CEO. And, in the past in companies, it's been the managing director. We don't have an MD now. We have exec publishers and then a CEO at SNS. But when I was at HarperCollins, if it was a lot of money, it would have to go from the UK up to the US. So it would have to go to like the big boss. If it was a lot of money, I mean, that was rare, but it did happen. And So there's kind of a chain of command for sure. And ultimately, if the sales figures that you get given do not work, you can't really offer, or you don't want, it puts you off offering because you're like, well, I don't want to buy this and we don't think we can sell any copies. What I should have said in answer to your previous question is that some of the numbers come from comparison titles. That's a big part of it. So we look at what other books are similar to the book we're trying to buy in the market. So genre-wise or theme-wise. And we have the data to look up what did those books sell. And then sales sort of base their estimate, and it is an estimate, they base that on what the others have done. If it's an author where they already have books published, we look at the track record, which authors I know get anxious about, and kind of rightly so, because if you have a bad track record, it can be really difficult because it can put off a publisher, mainly because it puts off the retailers. So it's not actually that we don't like it, it's that if we go to, for example, a supermarket and we say, this author's got their 4th book out, but the first 3 sold really badly through Tesco, they'll be like, well, no thanks. So we have to work around that. Sometimes we change an author's name, or we have to be really forceful and passionate, or we have to pay, or we say things like, you've got to get this book in for XYZ reasons. And, the publisher can control an element of that, but not all of that. And I do think it's difficult because for authors, if their books haven't sold well, often it's because of a variety of reasons, most of which are not the author's fault. So I do struggle with that, but it's true.
Yeah, that's really interesting part there, because I think I've certainly read articles about, authors who, as you say, have that fear of, I haven't sold very well, my next book is being judged on my past sales. And do you, as a publisher, do you look at, it sounds like the answer is no, but do you look at just the sales of a book, or would you look at that previous author's, why did that book not do very well? Was it the marketing? Was it what the publisher did before? Was there reasons why it didn't sell that we can bypass?
So we can access a certain amount of data. So if it was an internal book, then yes, we can look back and be like, what did we do wrong or what didn't work? If there were obvious market forces, for example, the pandemic years miss out a lot of data because it wasn't running. So that's a factor. If it's bought from another publisher, we can see the physical sales through the total consumer market on Nielsen. And we can sometimes see the ebook and audio through different systems, but they're not as reliable. So we can look at those things, but we can't necessarily say, oh, what did that publisher do marketing-wise specifically, because we don't see it. We can see what the average selling price was for a physical book. So if it's a low price, we can say, okay, well, it probably went into the supermarkets at that time. If it's a high price, we think, okay, well, it didn't go into any places that would discount it. So you can sort of get a sense of what might have happened. And obviously you can look at the author's social media, you can read the book and look at the themes and think whether that was an issue or whatever. And, you can look at the reputation of the editor and the publishing house that published it. So yes, some authors are published not very well. That's true. Luckily some are published well, and that's good. And you can talk to the author if they're coming to talk to you. You can say, what do you think? Well, what was the issue with the last book? Why do you think it didn't connect? But often an author won't really know, and it's not really. I would argue it's not really their job to know. I think it's our job to know as publishers. But yes, there are ways to bypass that. And for example, Broken Country this year, that was a big hit, and her, that was a change of name for her. And I don't know all the background on her previous ones, but this was more of a breakout book for her under a different name. And Paula Hawkins, The Girl on the Train, that's not her first novel. She wrote under a different name, and obviously that was a monster hit. Yeah, so this happens, it does happen. And if the idea is really great, then I believe, we should try and bypass a track record. So yes, there are ways around it, but I don't want to lie to people and say that we don't look at the track, because we do.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask about that, because I think certainly from a writer's point of view, and what you hear speaking to other writers and stuff, is that publishers are very risk averse, and so that process of using comparison titles, does that mean then that if you've written something that's different, it's a much harder thing to push over the line, because there isn't that comparison to make for, so you can't say this has a track record and stuff like that. So would you say that the publishing industry is risk averse, has become more risk averse over the years?
Yes, it's relatively risk averse. It's not actually that big, financially we're pretty small compared to like some other industries and some other media. I think we do take risks. I think sometimes we don't take enough risks. when it comes to comp titles, to be honest, there usually is something. They don't have to be books. They can be film or TV sometimes. In terms of like helping to pitch it, or podcasts, or quite often we'll say it's like a bit of this and a bit of that, X meets Y, etc. So that you can usually find a way of comping it. And it's a shorthand, and I guess it's mainly useful for the sales team, because realistically their job means that they can't read every book cover to cover. They do read they do read the books we send around, but there is obviously a limit on their time and with the volume coming through. And look, I don't think this is a perfect system. Like, I'm not particularly defending it. I'm just kind of staying how it is. And I think that we do lose some. I think sometimes we should take more risks, but ultimately, like, we often don't have that much money to play with, like, because as I say, like, printing and binding costs have gone up, shipping costs have gone up. I don't know, it's not like we're sitting on huge piles of money. Like, obviously some of the big 5 publishers of where I've always worked, like, we do have money, but like, there are also lots of other costs that go, so not all of the money goes on author advances. Basically, it's the cost of running a business, and that's why you see a lot of independent publishers sadly not surviving. Knights of folded the other day. Like, sadly, either you get bought out and you get bought into a bigger conglomerate, or there's some brilliant independents that do sustain themselves, but the advances are lower. So it's sort of just business in general. Yeah.
And when you I've always been interested in things like when you've got like a bidding war going on, or like a preempt, how does that work in practice? How do editors and publishers look at a book and engage in like a bidding war, for instance? And I mean, because that's quite difficult in terms of judging what other publishers are going to put on something and what things work.
Can I jump in, just for listeners or viewers that don't know? But could you explain what a preempt is as well, because it's something that bandied around and people might not know.
Sure. Yeah. So a preempt is a preemptive offer. So it's basically an offer that asks the agent to take the novel off the table. So I have sometimes preempted books, and essentially it's when I've really loved something and I've thought, oh God, I can't be bothered to go to an auction. I don't want this to go to an auction. And so then you put in basically a higher offer, but with a time limit. So you might say, okay, I'm going to email you 4 p.m. on a Friday, and we wouldn't do it on a Friday, but like 4 p.m. on a Monday, and you need to get back to me by 12 o'clock Tuesday. And so my offer is on the table for that amount of time. So the agent can either choose to take it. It's a bit like that game, like Deal or No Deal. Like, you can either take the money by the time. Or you can say, no, actually, I'm going to go to auction, because they might get more money in an auction, but they might lose it. They might not get more money. So then it's kind of like, do you want to have a bird in the hand, or whatever that phrase is? So that's basically how that works. Can't remember.
So would you genuinely, if you made an offer that you'd preempt, if you made a preempt offer and they said, no, we're going to go take it to auction, would you ever increase your offer, or would you? No, is that normally the cap of your assignment?
I feel that would lose credibility if you did that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Maybe twice, like absolute max. I think you can. I think occasionally you have said, if they said no at 12, you say, okay, I'm going to add 20 grand, and say no by 5 p.m. Sometimes that. Yeah, but usually they'll either say, no, we're not going to accept it. So yes, they do that a little bit, but not really more than twice, I would say.
Yeah, and you can't really increase your offer and it goes to auction after that, because, as Marcus says, you kind of lose.
So then when it goes to auction, we go back down. So then we're like, okay, fine, you don't want to take that. We'll
so you actually do go down.
Then we go down.
Oh, okay.
So that's the risk. Right. So then everyone goes down, and then it's like, okay, well, if you want to play everyone off against each other, like, we're going to start down, because if I start high, like, everyone will push back. So that kind of ties into the other part of the question. So if you are in an auction, and actually I'm just starting to be in an auction right now, with a book on submission, the agent will set you a deadline, and they will usually say what the top offer is. So they'll say, okay, there's 10 publishers in, the top offer is 100 grand for 2. You have until Tuesday to make your second offer. And so you have to sort of bid. It's a bit of blind. You have to try and like decide. Some people drop out, you say, no, thanks, that's too high. Or you say, okay, we still like it. We have to reconvene with sales and marketing and with whoever signs things off. And then you say, okay, well, we're going to bid again. We're going to offer 120 grand, and we're going to show them all our passion, and we're going to add in a bonus and things like that. And you usually go through, some people really drag it out, but usually you shouldn't really go more than like 2 or 3 rounds in an auction. And usually what happens is people sometimes get knocked out after the first round or after the second round. And then you might move from a second round to a meeting with the author, if it's very competitive. And then that's when you hear about like a kind of beauty parade where the author is sort of carted around all the publishing houses by their agent, and we kind of try and present to them and say, look, why don't you come with us? And the whole thing takes ages and it's really stressful, but sometimes you win great books out of it. I published a book called Girl A by Abigail Dean a few years ago, and that was in an auction. That was in a big auction, and we did have a meeting with her, and obviously it went well and we won, so that was really, really exciting. And I've preempted quite a few books and won a fair few auctions, but you also lose them. I've lost quite a few as well, and sometimes everyone is the underbidder before where you're not actually the highest offer, but they think you're the best seller, just they connect with you more.
Well, I mean, it's actually, I suppose it's not always the value of the advance. It's also what you can offer, what the marketing would be, or where it would sit on the list, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And auctions usually take place, within the course of like a week or two, and the agent will kind of set out the rules of the auction. And they are pretty stressful, to be honest, because often you have to because we're also trying to do our jobs like around all this. So like you can't, like all your meetings, you have to sort of like drop everything for like a few hours, and I don't love it, I find it quite tricky, but it's also, I guess, you get like the adrenaline, and then you have your like competitive instinct kicks in, and you're like, I want to win. But you can't always know because sometimes the author and the agent will be thinking something, or to be honest, sometimes they'll be like, well, we know who we're going to go with anyway, but we're just going to use everyone else to try and push them up. And fair play, it's the agent's prerogative. You should just get a good agent. That's what I say to authors: just get a good agent. So,
And once all of that is done, once you have won the auction or the offer has been accepted or whatever, once a book is taken in, what is the process then from the publishing side of things?
Yeah. So once we agree the terms, so often once you win an auction, you then still have to do the deal memos. Well, you have to agree the deal memo, but then you have to do the contract, and often that negotiation can get a bit more nitty gritty, and you might hit stumbling blocks, but usually it gets resolved in the end. Sometimes it falls through, which is very annoying, but not very often. And then at that point, I'll have reached out to the author and welcomed them and have a call or a meeting, and then essentially I'll just get on with the edits. So I will send them their structural edits. At the same time, I would start to brief the cover, maybe do a press release announcement, tell the teams that we've won, and, they can meet the rest of the team if they need to. And then the kind of editorial process begins. So I usually do a structural edit, maybe more than one, depending on how much work the book needs. And then some people do a line edit if it really needs it. And then it goes out to a copy editor and proofreader. And then it goes into production, and so that's when it gets typeset, and then you get to see what people would call the page proofs, and that's always a nice moment for an author, because then it starts to look a bit more like it's going to become a book. And all the while that's happening, the marketing and publicity teams are kind of preparing and like getting their ducks in a row for publication. But as you all both know, like publication can be a way off, so it can be like a year ahead or 18 months ahead. Sometimes in digital publishing it can be quick, so like a few months, but in more traditional big houses it can be like at least a year away. So you have quite a long time. And I think for authors that can then feel like all the excitement of the acquisition has faded and it's gone like a bit quiet, but you have to rest assured that there are things going on behind the scenes. And also we're working on a lot of books at once, so it sort of peaks and troughs. You might have a period where you're in touch with your editor a lot, and then it might be a bit quieter, but you should always be able to be in touch with your editor. And this is another thing that bothers me about the industry, is that sometimes authors, I feel, don't get enough comms from editors, and they feel like they're not in the loop, or they're not really being updated. And I do try really hard to keep my authors up to date, and just be there if they want to have a chat, because it's their books are their job, it's their business, and it's like a small business. So I think it's really important that we treat authors with that respect. And I suppose because I'm on the author side as well, I feel a bit more like strongly about it than maybe some other people. But I know all editors do try to do that, but I think I just hear a lot from authors that they don't get enough comms. So I think they should have more comms.
When it comes to the editing side of things, when you're working on, or when you're, I suppose when you're looking at at the starting point what edits you would want to do, and getting an idea of what you'd want to change, what needs firmed up, etc. How close to finish does a book need to be for you? Would you take a book on that you think needs a lot of work, but you really like the voice, or sometimes you think actually is there a good book in there somewhere, but it's just too messy just now?
Yeah. I mean, there's not like a set answer, but yes, definitely I would take on something if I thought the voice was really amazing, or if the concept was really great, but it needed some structural work, because that's fine. I can do that. It definitely doesn't need to be perfect. What I would usually do in that scenario, if it felt like it needed a lot of work, is I would maybe have a call or a video call or a meeting with the author first, so I could get a sense of, are they prepared to work on this? Because if I think it needs a lot of work and I meet the author and they say, well, I think it's perfect and I don't think it needs any editorial work at all, then I'll be like, that's a bit of a red flag, because you also want someone who's going to be collaborative and, nice to work with. So I think I'd usually do that sense check. And if they're up for the work, then I'd say, okay, well, great. We can sign you, but we will need to do this work first. And then we'll keep going with it.
Presumably as well, though, because often that's a question we would ask of, for example, agents or something. And so presumably what you're seeing should be, in theory anyway, sort of one step up from that, in the sense that an agent hopefully will have got it in. I was going to say.
So technically it is supposed to have gone through, I'm really joking. Like, yes, it's gone through the agent. So like, most of what I get is great. Most of what I get is really good quality. But not for me for various reasons. But yeah, so the agent does a kind of editorial process. Some agents are more hands-on than others. So some agents are very editorial, some are less so. It tends to be the case that once you're in a kind of established deal with an editor, the agent becomes a bit less hands-on because they have the editor. But it varies. But yes, we've kind of, when it comes to me, it's already gone through the kind of first hurdle of the agent. Yeah.
And when it comes to, I suppose the next stage after that in my head is the edits are done and you're kind of looking into the marketing and you're trying to making the big splash. And, obviously you want every book to kind of land well. And I often wonder how is that decision reached? How do you decide what marketing a book should what form of marketing a book should get, and also how much marketing a book should get? Is it related purely to the size of the advance, or is it more than just that?
So a lot of that should be decided at acquisition. So we're supposed to decide at acquisition what level it should get. Sometimes that changes if we notice it getting a lot of traction. For example, when I was at HarperCollins and the team did How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie, it just began to gain a lot of traction. So then we decided, okay, we're going to do an outdoor campaign, which means that advertising on the London Underground. But that was not part of the original plan. That was because it was selling so well kind of on its own. So, obviously you have to remain flexible and be able to pivot if you need to and add more spend. A lot of the marketing campaign budget is decided on just the strength of it. Is this a book that we really think could connect to a large audience, in which case it should be a priority title? Is it a book that's like a bit more niche and the audience is maybe a bit more limited, maybe gets a bit less of a marketing campaign? And there are different types of marketing campaign. Should it be just like a digital campaign? Is that actually more effective? We don't do London Underground advertising very often because it's incredibly expensive, and it doesn't, it's not. The other thing about London Underground advertising is that it doesn't track, so we can't analyze the data. Whereas if we do digital advertising, we can track. We can do A/B testing. We can check whether the strapline is connecting and the cover, and you can get more data, which is more useful for like building an author's long-term career. It's decided by the marketing director, so she or he or she will decide the budget for the books, and then usually like if, at this level, like I will sort of be across that and know what level the books are at. But it does vary, and a lot of it depends on the author. Is the author someone with a platform? Is the author someone that we think is going to be a real asset and help us, and go out and about and do lots of events and build those connections alongside ours and be part of the team? And is it in a genre where we think there's a lot of growth? So for example, at the moment, a lot of marketing spend is going on science fiction fantasy novels and romantasy books because that market is in such extreme growth. But yeah, and it sort of depends on things like, how well did the last book do, or, what is our actual ambition for this title? And we have to be realistic. I would love every book I publish to be a huge bestseller. Obviously, I would love that, but it's just not realistic. So what instead I'm trying to do is think, okay, what are, for example, like 3 goals that I want to achieve with this book and that the author also wants to achieve, and like how can we achieve those together? And then, if we achieve those, then great. And, we can build forwards. We can't always just be like, I want to be a #1 bestseller, because it's just not possible. Yeah. So it's just thinking a bit more strategically and also thinking long term, I think. Yeah.
Again, one thing that you pick up from speaking to writers and stuff like that is that, there's an idea that debuts will get a push from the publishing house and big names will get a push from the publishing house, but there's obviously the middle list in between. And I think there's certainly an impression that a lot of the time the publishers will put the book out, but they won't push very much behind it at that point because you're not an exciting new debut or you're not a big name. I mean, is that fair, that criticism, or is it a writerly moan?
I think there is a look. Yes, there is an element of truth in that. I think people get very excited about a debut, and I think people obviously feel excited by big brands that can continue to deliver revenue. But that said, there is still an awful lot of work that does go into the mid-list in terms of like every author. Editorially, it's like you kind of get the same amount of work, and so the editors are always working really hard, I would say, on all of their books. I think the issue comes when there is a set amount of marketing campaign or spend and there just isn't enough. Like, to be honest, most publishers are under-resourced when it comes to marketing, and to be honest, in all ways. Like, we are pretty much under-resourced in all departments. I'm not talking about SNS, I'm just literally talking about like everywhere I've worked. And I don't really know why it's like that, but it's what it is. I think in essence we take on a lot of books, and we take on sometimes too many books. I would like to try at Simon Schuster to have a smaller list, but a list that is strong in terms of author care and in terms of what we actually achieve with those books. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not that people don't care about the mid-list, they do, and it's very important. Those authors are often bringing in like solid amounts of revenue. It might not be huge, but it's still, if you took all of it away, would not be good. So, and those authors deserve to have their stories told. And so it just, unfortunately, I suppose it's like anything, unfortunately, we just end up not being able to give exactly the same amount of priority to every author. I mean, there are places like Bookseller, digital publisher, where they say to all authors, you're going to have the same marketing spend. And I think that's nice. I think they've done a great job. I think they're a really brilliant company. And I think if you're happy with being a digital author, then, it's a brilliant home. The problem is that some authors aren't happy with just digital. So, I understand that as well. So the mid-list is super important. And, I genuinely care about all of my authors very much. And I think the rest of my team do as well. And every editor I've worked with cares about their authors, and so do all the marketing and the other departments. It's just an issue of, I think it's an issue of resource. And there are some books that, they're maybe just not as mass market, they're maybe just a bit niche, or the idea isn't quite as good, but the author really wants to stick to it. Or sometimes, you get situations where the author and the agent have been really difficult about a cover or a title, and they've really dug their heels in, and actually we've ended up with a book that doesn't really look commercial enough in our opinion. And so at that point we might be like, well, they didn't really listen to us, it's not going to get into the supermarket, so we're not going to get as many sales. And that does happen, unfortunately.
And are you ever surprised by how well a book does or doesn't do based on the marketing? Because I think I know it's not true, but my base level, my brain says, well, if there's loads of marketing behind something and it's plastered everywhere, surely that should lead to sales because it's just in everyone's head. But obviously that's not the case. It's not as simple as the more money you throw at something, the more it will sell. No. But are you ever surprised by how well something does or how badly something does based on how the marketing's been?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are cases where they've just, we see this more now with things like TikTok and BookTok, where actually the readers are telling us what they want. So they're telling us, okay, we want romance, or we want dragon romance, all these strange subgenres that I don't really know about, but but my team do, so that's good. They, so you have to listen to the readership part at a certain extent. And now, obviously, with we look at things like Reddit threads and, social media and say, okay, people are posting on this really regularly. They really like this character. They really like this book. So let's see if we can get more books from this author or bring on a self-published author. That's happening quite a lot. And often those books haven't got a huge amount of marketing spend, but they take off really organically. And then, I can think of examples of books that were bought with a big fanfare and actually had a big campaign and they just didn't connect. Like, that has definitely happened before. And we're not always right. We can't always predict exactly how things will go. And you can look back retrospectively. And I think that's actually really useful to do, to look back and say, did we get this right? Is this title a bit misunderstood? Is this a bit unclear? Or is this a bit of a dark cover? Does it not look as good as we thought it might? Or, was there, is the book, it's usually not really about the content, I would say. Sometimes it is, because if the content is very strong, you get really good word of mouth. And that can be a huge driver. And that's something that we are less able to control. But, when you get to a level like, for example, something like Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, or one of those big breakout hits, a lot of that will have been, it's kind of it's like a snowball, like that has gathered momentum, and then as we see that momentum, we do more marketing, and so it kind of has a big effect. But then of course there are books and there are brand authors that are in decline. Unfortunately, a lot of brands are in decline, and that's indicative of the cost of living crisis and the literacy crisis. So I mean, that's all a bit depressing, really. I don't want to go on about it. Yeah.
but yeah, I suppose that leads on to the question of, in your eyes, what makes a book successful? Is it purely the monetary gains that the book makes, or is it relative to how much of the advance it gets back, or over that amount and stuff like that?
So from a business perspective, it's ideally, if the book has earned itself out and we have made back the money we spent and the author is then getting royalties, that is, I guess, on paper, that is successful. But, I also didn't get into this job just for money, it's, I mean, believe me, I would be in another industry if that was all the thing I wanted. But I think, it's also, you get messages from readers, you get amazing reviews, you get, I think books can change people's lives. They change my life, they help my life, they enhance my life, and sure the same goes for you both. So I think it's important to not lose sight of that, and lose sight of the idea that even if it changes one person's life, or a good book takes one person out of a really bad place in their head or something, great, that is also, to me, that is a success. And if I have made an author's dream come true by getting them published, that is also a huge thing for me. I love that calling an author and saying, we're going to publish your book, and it literally is like a lifelong dream for so many people. I'm so privileged to be able to help them achieve that, and to also have achieved it myself. I feel really, really lucky to have had those things. And so it's important that whilst it is a business, and I think I talk a lot about the business side, but it's also a really creative, magical industry in loads of ways, and it's so important that we don't lose sight of why we're in the industry in the first place.
And I also wanted to ask you about your Substack, which you mentioned at the start, the Honest Editor, and it's very interesting articles that you write. You're kind of going into the realities of the publishing industry and the process, and I guess I just wanted to ask you what made you want to start it. Do you think there is an issue in publishing about transparency, about people not wanting to talk about things like money, and kind of the British want to close up and not be open about stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a massive issue. That's why I started it, because I just think, I don't know, I feel like there's this odd us versus them vibe, not with everybody, but I think there's a sort of, we're publishers and we're in these situations of privilege and we hand out book deals and we're behind these pearly gates and we're not real people. And and it's very elite. It can be quite an elitist. It is changing. It's not a very diverse industry. It is quite a white middle class industry, and there are lots of amazing people trying to do things differently and champion, all of the DE&I side of things. But I also think that part of that, it's not just about that. It's also transparency. It's also being okay, we're going to treat authors as if they are actual people, rather than, I think what we do sometimes in the industry is we actually sometimes we turn authors into complete monsters. We're fawn over them to the extent that they believe that, they become they do become physical. There's a lot of egos. Sorry, you have to cancel all this out. I don't know. No, I think feeling bad. I don't
Name
think.
some names.
We do that.
Yeah. Who's the worst person publishing?
Oh my god. Honestly, I could tell you some horrendous stories, but but it's also, it's just I just try and be normal with people. I'm yeah, you're a great writer, happy to meet you. I don't think you're God's gift, I think you're a great writer, and and I'm a good editor, let's just be normal about it, and and equally, it's I think there's just a funny thing where sort of we put authors on a pedestal, but then when their sales drop, we're no thanks, so that's really unfair. That's not normal. I think it's you've got to treat people with honesty, and I think you've got to say to them, this is why your book hasn't sold very well. This is what we think. What do you think? How can we work on this together? And that's the kind of publisher I want to be, I suppose. And not everybody feels the same, and that's fine. But I started the Substack so that I could try to feel more connected to authors and empathize with authors. And I really hope that it has helped people to just understand what goes on behind the scenes. And the articles aren't really, they're not not really very opinionated. They're just sort of this is what goes on behind the scenes of publishing. And I think that can help authors, especially with things I think a lot of authors struggle when their book goes on submission and they don't hear anything for ages, and they actually does affect people's mental health. And so I tried to just explain why you might not be hearing anything. It's not that your book is bad, it's that XYZ reasons, you can read my article. But so that's kind of why I started it, was just to try and shed some light and to try and break down the sort of barriers that can exist between authors and publishers, because I think really we should just be part of the same team.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that makes
What
sense.
if we flipped the script and we just treated authors like utter shit, and then any kind of
No, I
success
don't
was
want
like purely up the way? It was nothing. There's nowhere to go but up.
No, sorry, I don't want to do that either. I hope I'm not coming across like that. I just want us all to
No,
be
of course
normal.
I'm just being an
I think
arsehole.
people just, no, I just think, let's just be normal. Like, I really admire writers and respect writers. Of course I do. Like, that's why I want to work with them. I think they're brilliant and creative, and there's nothing like a really amazing submission. But, I also think it's good to just be, like a team. Like, in a way, you can kind of colleagues. And of course there is a power imbalance because there's the financial side, but it's interesting how the power balance tips as well. Like, if an author becomes successful, and I think that can lead to sort of unhealthy relationships or unhealthy habits.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely right. Yeah.
And then the other big topic that we need to ask about, I suppose, is AI and its impact on the industry. Now, obviously, from a writer's point of view, there are very, very strong views about, what's happening with that. But I just wondered what your view was from a publishing side of things in relation to AI.
Yeah, I think, there obviously is a lot of discussion, particularly about how it will impact translation and audio. So, will we end up with audio narrators that are just AI, or, will translators lose their jobs? And that is obviously a concern. Most publishers are pretty skeptical about AI. Like, most publishers, I think, are not using a huge amount of AI, and most of them have got boards set up to discuss AI, particularly, or roles. I do think that we should be using it where it helps. Like, I think if there are huge things in publishing, like operational things and things behind the scenes, metadata, that are incredibly time consuming for younger assistants and managing editorial teams, whose time actually could be spent, on actually more human based skills, like, like, rather than sort of repetitive tasks that are essential because they need to be on Amazon and they need to be correct. But realistically, if we could get AI to do those and free up the staff members to do the more creative side and the desk editorial side, the sort of nuanced editing side, which is really important, then I think, that could be good. But we need to harness it, obviously, as a kind of force for good rather than a force that will, cause people to lose their jobs. And then, I think there are loads of books out there that are written by AI. I don't think I'm getting any submissions written by AI, but I might be being incredibly naive. But I think because mine come through agents, like, I don't think they are really. But I'm fairly, I'm sure that on Amazon there are lots of books that are written by AI. And I'm not really sure how we stop that.
I mean, I was going to ask, obviously, how does that then, if the market starts to get flooded with books, does that make the job of the publisher even more difficult in terms, because it must have an impact on how many copies can this book sell or whatever. Obviously, a lot of AI books are utter crap, but if just in terms of like being able to find such, real books and things like that, is that going to be an issue, do you think?
Well, potentially. I don't think we're there yet, but I imagine what will really happen is, we will find a way to adapt. Everybody. It was difficult, a few years ago when Amazon, not longer ago than that, but, when Amazon published a lot and themselves, and then the Kindle Top 100 is flooded with the books that are published by Amazon because they can control that. And they obviously publish their own books as a publishing house as well as a conglomerate. So that is a challenge. We don't get as many books into the Top 100 anymore because Amazon published them, they're very low priced and we can't really compete because of the algorithms. And so... But, we adapt and, find ways around it. And the top 100 maybe doesn't have as much meaning as it would have done 10 years ago. We have different routes to market and we have different sales factors and different bestseller lists, I suppose. Or, we create different metrics in our minds. So I imagine what would happen if the market became flooded with AI is that, we'd have to just kind of work our way around it. I don't know enough about it to it's not a part of my job, AI, at all, really. So I don't really know. And to be honest, I don't really use it. Like, occasionally I use the little chat thing on your phone, but God, I sound 100 years old. Little chat thing on your phone. I honestly don't use it very much. So I'm not a very good person to talk to about it, but I imagine that we would find a way to adapt, I hope. Yeah.
And I suppose, finally, what kind of advice would you have for people out there, either as an editor or as a writer yourself, in terms of people who are trying to plug away or trying to break in, who're trying to write something or find a home for something? What's your thoughts for them?
So from an editor's point of view, if you want to be in the publishing industry, my main piece of advice is to say yes to things. Like I've always said yes to lots of opportunities in my career. So it's whether that's, will you take on this author, or will you have a go at this genre, or will you take this job? Like usually I say yes, because if there's something I will learn or something I will grow from, then I'm excited to do that. If I was speaking to writers, the obvious one everyone says is you just have to keep going, because the only way to guarantee that you won't be published is to stop writing. Yeah. And so I think that's really important. And I do think getting a literary agent is a really helpful thing. I do think that self-publishing is hard. Some people can do it, and there's a lot of successful authors recently who have self-published and can make a lot of money. But I would still say that depends on your skill set. If you have the skill set to do everything yourself, then great. I would literally not have the skills to do it. But I think in terms of writing, and remind yourself why you're doing it. You actually don't have to do it. Like you don't have to be an author if you find it too depressing or too demoralizing, but you have to kind of find the grit. It is competitive, but you have to find the grit to be able to keep going. And I think keep reading as well, because I think that can be really inspiring, and it's important to read around your genre, keep learning, and connect with other writers. I think that can be helpful as well. And listen to podcasts like this. It's great to have these kind of platforms now for people to speak more openly on. So I think it's, and there are no age limits, there are no kind of barriers. We don't look for I don't really care what age the authors I'm publishing are. I think there's a lot of kind of strange myths thinking you have to do it by the time you're 35 or whatever, but it's just not true. So, and a lot of authors have success later in life, so don't feel like it's ever too late.
No, that's great.
Nice.
Well, I mean, those were the main questions that we had for you, but we always end our podcasts by asking our guests the same questions. The first of which is, what was the last book that you read that you can talk about?
Oh, gosh. I just have one say that mine just goes blank.
That's a horrible question.
Mainly mostly I read fiction, but recently I've been trying to challenge myself to read more non-fiction. And I read Empire of Pain, which is about the Sackler family crisis. I don't know if you read about the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely fascinating. I was obsessed with it for months and months. All I could talk about was the opioid crisis. Everyone's like, Phoebe, stop talking about opioids. I was unable to do so because it was just so interesting. It's this incredible scandal. You probably know, and I knew vaguely about it, but when you read it, what this family did and the way they kind of, there's been TV shows. Dope Sick is based on that, and there's another one, both of which are really good. So this incredible history of the Sackler family, who are still around today, and their names have been taken off all the universities and the buildings that they contributed to in a philanthropic way, because their name became synonymous with the fact that they released drugs into America that were incredibly dangerous. But it was just an amazing book, and because I often find nonfiction a bit inaccessible, but it's so accessible, and it's it's pretty dense, but it's also just fascinating. So I would say that is a real recommendation. I loved it. What is the author's name? It's gone out of my head. Famous author.
Patrick Radden Keefe, I think, is it?
Yeah,
something like that.
I think so. Something. Patrick,
I've got it. I've not read it, but I've also read his other book.
Well, you've got to read it. It's so good.
I know. I'm going to read it.
Cut me off, so I'll talk about opioid crisis for like.
He's also got another book called Say Nothing about Northern Ireland, which is meant to be amazing as well. Yeah,
that's meant to be really good as well. Yeah.
What about the last film that you watched?
Do you know what? I am really, really bad at films. I'll tell you what I've been watching in TV.
Yeah.
My boyfriend and I have been watching the new Alan Partridge. Don't know if you like Alan Partridge.
Oh, right, excellent. I've not seen the new series.
How Are You or something. It's so funny. I keep falling asleep in it, but that's because I'm so tired from the job, not because I'm not enjoying it. He's very funny. And I actually love Alan Partridge's audiobooks as I just me and my brothers like them, and they're just all silly humor, but I think it's really interesting because he's obviously just created that it's such a great character study of how does one create a character that endures for years that the public understand and love. So I've been watching his new TV show, which is very funny.
Excellent.
I love when you get a character like that then puts out a fake book, and then the author, then the person reads it, and it becomes this kind of meta joke.
It's clever, isn't it?
It's brilliant.
Really clever.
It's great.
Yeah. And it's hard, and I think it's hard to do. Not many characters can get that. Get that level of cut through.
Lasts for so many years as well. Definitely.
It's great.
Well, thanks very much to Phoebe for coming on to the podcast. Like you said at the start, I thought that was a really interesting and open chat about it really, we spoke to Francesca Barbini last week, smaller publisher, smaller press, and I think you could really see the differences between the sort of decision making that is involved between a big press and a smaller press there. And I think as well, some of the questions I was asking are perhaps slightly, I don't want to say negative, but the sort of the worries that you hear from writers about things being on the mid list and not getting that marketing push and things like that. And I thought, again, very honest responses from her, and it does make sense, I suppose, that if a book's isn't going to hit as wide a market, then you're not going to spend as much money on it, trying to make it do that if it's not going to succeed. So
and I also found interesting her point about something which we've chatted about before, I think, on Adventures in Publishing Land, our sister news podcast, which was about kind of how an author's previous work are looked at by a publisher when it comes to making a second deal or a new deal or a new offer on new work, and I think that's I find that very interesting about what they look at, what access they might have to stuff, and I guess how much is kind of gut feeling of, well, why didn't something perhaps work as well as it might have? What was the reason?
Also, like it's not the be all and end all either. I thought I took from that as well, because although it might be bad, if they like the book, Phoebe was saying that she would have a discussion potentially with the author to try and find out, what they thought went wrong. There are other ways you can change your name and sort of relaunch your career and things like that. So
Paul Hawkins, I had no idea. Jane had no idea.
I didn't know that.
I always thought it was the first book that got on the train.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So
put the wool over my eyes. Well done.
Thanks very much to Phoebe for coming on to the podcast and talking with us about that. We'll put a link to her page on the Simon Schuster website and stuff in the podcast description. But next week, possibly it might be in 2 weeks, depending on editing availability. So there may be a week off. Don't worry, 246 episodes before. Just listen to one of those.
It's a week off for us, right? I can put my feet up.
Yeah, we might even put a drafting notes out in between so that you've got something to listen to. But our next episode of Page One is another industry episode, and we're speaking with another agent.
Yes, we are indeed. We're chatting with the fantastic Jenny Brown of Jenny Brown Associates. She's a literary agency. She is part of I think one of the biggest agencies in Scotland, anyway, based in Edinburgh, our home city. And I think it's going to be a studio interview we have with her. So it'll be a chat face to face, which is always, I think, I always prefer these face to face ones because you kind of get as much more, nice back and forth to kind of get more in-depth, easier chat with them and stuff. It's nice. So that's really, really, a really interesting one. She works with a whole bunch of fantastic big authors, and she's always a big name at festivals. You often see her going around.
Absolutely, one of the biggest agents in Scotland, definitely, if not the biggest, and also, as you say, involved in festivals, involved in things like Bloody Scotland and things like that as well. So we will be talking to her about all of that. So please do tune in for that one. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us in your favourite podcast app, as that helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast. If you're watching it on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, give us a follow or subscribe, whatever it's called, and you can leave a comment down below if it's nice.
Right. Yes. And if you don't want to leave us a comment, you can always send us an email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk. You can find us on all the usual social media sites. Just search for @UK Page One, and or join the Discord. Come along, it's free. Come and say hi there. Yeah, lots of ways to get into this. Lots of ways to tell us how much you hate what we're doing. There's multiple ways in.
Exactly. But otherwise, have a great week or two, and we'll speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.